Colonel, thanks for taking the time and congratulations on the new job.
Thank you.
So I went back and I rewatched our interview from 3 years ago when you were sworn in as colonel of this agency. And one of my last questions to you was, how long do you see yourself as colonel of the state police? And your answer was, I'd like to be here for a long time, as long as I'm welcome. I'm curious if you find 3 years to be a long time and if you still feel welcome.
Well, I definitely feel welcome. So that's not what this is about. As long as looking back at 3 years, I would have liked to stay 4 to 5 years at a minimum. But looking at what the past 2 years have been like, I think we could all agree that accelerates everything. It's been a very challenging time for the past 2 years.
We had no idea what was coming.
No, we didn't.
When we sat here 3 years ago.
My eyes were wide open in that interview, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But there's another point to this. I was not looking to leave the Rhode Island State Police. And I did know that, but I did know that I loved being a town manager in Narragansett. I loved that role that I played there. And I knew when the day came when I left this position, I would like to go back to be a town manager somewhere. So about a month ago, the position in South Kingstown opened where they were taking applications, and I thought long and hard about it. So to have the ability to interview for a position that I truly loved, a town manager's position, in the town I live in, was something that I really had to think long and hard about, and I ultimately decided I would apply for it.
For being superintendent for 3 years, I'm sure you balanced this in your head. Was there any concern on your end that you're leaving the agency too soon and too abruptly?
Well, abruptly, no. I mean, I've given the governor about 8 to 9 weeks notice so that we could do a great transition when the time comes, and that I'm confident we will be doing. But yes, I mean, you're always thinking that. Once again, if I stayed longer, what could I have accomplished more? But this is another thing that weighed on me. I accomplished every single thing that I put on that list to accomplish, much quicker than I thought I could. That's one. Number two, I'd be leaving the agency in a little better place than when I got here. And that's the threshold to use for any place when you go into it. And three, I'd be leaving at the top of my game. And those are three things that are very important to me, and that all weighed in on my decision.
I want to talk about your accomplishments in a minute. But when there's a changeover in this position, a lot of people wonder, was it either a disagreement with the governor, or maybe not a right fit? And it shouldn't be lost on anyone that you were appointed under Governor Gina Raimondo. She goes off to Washington, D.C. We have a new governor. Colonel James Manni is leaving the state police. Should people at all be thinking that either he wanted you gone or that you weren't necessarily within his philosophy and you wanted to go? Any of that play a factor?
Well, first off, I'm very thankful to then Governor Raimondo for appointing me to this great position that we always look up to, and you always strive for when you're on the state police. Number two, I'm very thankful to Governor McKee for reappointing me a year ago to this position. To answer your question directly, absolutely not. Governor McKee and I have a great relationship. I respect him personally, and I respect him professionally. He's a good governor, and our thought processes, our goals and objectives match up perfectly. So no one should be reading into this at all.
When you picked up the phone and you said, Governor, I'm probably going to be leaving depending on the vote in the South Kingstown Town Council, what did he say to you?
So 3 weeks ago, I went to the governor and told him that I'd interviewed for the job, and that if it did go my way, I would accept it. And once again, he and I in his office talking about this. I think he really wanted me to stay. But he totally understood. I knew Governor McKee when he was the lieutenant governor and I was the town manager in Narragansett. He'd come down there all the time. He knew how much I enjoyed that job. So he was not surprised that I wanted to get back into that line of work.
So let's talk about the approach you took to this job. Going back to that interview 3 years ago, one of the questions I asked you was, what is your top priority going into this job as superintendent. And look, we can't ignore what happened in the 3 years we were hit with a pandemic, and then civil unrest really took off. But do you remember what your answer was when I asked what your number one? And this isn't a quiz.
Well, if I had to guess, it would be infrastructure, personnel, something along that line.
Yeah, that was one of your top answers. The number one thing on there was something you were a major for, which was community outreach.
Oh, yes.
Okay. I wonder if you hit that goal, though, Colonel, and possibly no fault to your own, just because of everything I listed. There was the pandemic and then significant civil unrest that put even more strain on the relationship between communities, particularly urban communities, and law enforcement. Do you feel like you hit that mark?
I do.
What's the evidence of that?
Well, first off, I think it was July of 2020. It was quite evident that there was unrest in this country and that we needed to bridge this gap. But we did have, the Rhode Island State Police, even long before I got here, we had great relationships with our community outreach partners. And I think that's what helped us get through that very tough period of civil unrest, is they still had the trust in us. They knew we were a good agency trying very hard to always do the right thing. But in that time, in July of 2020, I believe it was the date, I created a community diversity equity unit at the command staff level, which we appointed 39 ambassadors within the division of state police that are troopers to have outreach with all the communities for any topics. And I will say this, that the pandemic did hit us hard, and we were not able to go to as many events as we would have liked to, or bring that as far as we would have liked to. But it was still a success. Mm-hmm. All the restrictions that were put in place prevented large gatherings of people. So, I think anything across the board that relied on that type of interaction suffered during that 2-year period.
What are you most proud of?
My legacy, is that what you mean?
Sure, as superintendent, of course, in the last 3 years.
Well, I'm most proud of the men and women of the state police. That I truly mean. It's been such an honor to stand with them shoulder to shoulder, especially in this 2-year period that we just went through. They rose up to the occasion and they excelled, and they kept the state safe, and they kept the people of Rhode Island safe. They always put the residents first. I saw it firsthand what they went through. When the pandemic hit, there was so much uncertainty with COVID. How would that impact the police department? Some of the models showed us a third to half of the police officers could get very ill from this virus. And
I believe it was the leading cause of death for law enforcement in the past year or 2 years.
It was. And so we had models ready in the event we need to do some extreme things. Like if across the state, if half the police officers were ill, very ill, where they couldn't work, how would we keep patrols in the state going? And the state police would have been one of the leaders in that, in coordinating with the municipalities and providing assistance. So that was one of the big concerns, of the safety of the men and women of the state police to perform their function during this very tough time. I use this as a very simplistic way to look at this. When everyone was running this way, the troopers and law enforcement were running that way, right into the storm. And they did. And they put their health at risk. Luckily, those models were wrong. And we did have many cases of COVID on the state police. They stayed out, they came right back, and they worked. And we had a lot of interaction with the public.
10 years from now, when you think about back at your tenure as colonel, what memory is going to stand out to you most?
Well, the opportunity to have this title was going to stand out the most. That I feel like one of the luckiest people around, that I was able to not only attain my dream of being a trooper, but by being named as a superintendent. I used this as an example the other day. I truly feel like I climbed Mount Everest. I got to peek out over the top, and then I'll be able to climb down. But what will I remember, is your question? What the things I remember the most? There are certain things that I'll never forget. Most of them happened within this two-year period, not the 3-year period. One was very early on in the pandemic, when we had an executive order from the governor to restrict access to the state from other states and find out where people were going to be going and so forth. But once again, these models showed other states were getting hit extremely hard before we did, and that they might try to get to other states for their health care, their supermarkets, and so forth.
Your troopers were conducting highway stops from
That's
people out of state.
That's right.
When you think about it, it's pretty wild.
It was, and that was, at the time, was very controversial, and I know it made the national news. So we were diverting traffic with thousands of vehicles crossing the state line down Hope Valley, especially coming from the south. And I drove down there quite a bit to see it firsthand. And I'll never forget driving that stretch of highway from exit 3 to exit 2, southbound, and then vice versa, northbound, and not seeing one vehicle on the road. Not one. And I've driven that roadway thousands of times in my career because I was stationed out of that barracks. And not to see a vehicle on the highway was an eerie feeling, almost surreal. Like, what exactly is going on here? And then stopping at these rest areas and seeing National Guard soldiers and state troopers, doing contact tracing and providing information to the motorists. People were legitimately scared those first few weeks when all this was going on.
I have to imagine another memory for you that's going to stick out is the June 2020 riots in Providence, in which your agency had to assist, and I know you were there.
Yes.
I'm sure those images are forever in your head.
That one is definitely forever in my head. June 1st of 2020, we had seen a lot of civil unrest across the United States because of the George Floyd death, the incident that occurred. And a lot of it was directed at law enforcement. And I often wondered, because we had a great relationship with our residents, could this come to Rhode Island? Could this feeling come to Rhode Island? And it did. And June 1st, let me back up. The day before, Boston had a very large gathering. Some of it turned, I don't know if the word was riot up there, but it became very disruptive. And they had 500 state troopers have to go up there and handle that. Well, we don't have 500 troopers. We had 250 troopers in the entire state. So I wondered, okay, if something like that happens here, how are we going to handle this? Well, immediately we would have to call it the National Guard. So, but I remember going to the State House, getting intelligence from another law enforcement agency that they were following numerous vehicles heading to this state. And they were concerned that one of the malls was going to be looted. That's what came to me at about 9:15 on that night. I immediately called the governor, made her aware of my concerns, and rallied about 60 state troopers to be stationed in and around Providence. And sure enough, about 11 o'clock, it happened. Many people came, some from out of state, and it started out as a protest and quickly turned to a very disruptive behavior, eventually into a riot.
I just want to stop you here because there has been some disagreement with you on that intelligence. I think you're aware of that. I mean, Commissioner Perry has said that intelligence turned out to be wrong, that this was not an out-of-state action. This was driven largely by, and the arrests bear this out, people within Rhode Island. So do you still feel confident in that intelligence you had at the time?
I'm very respectful of Commissioner Perry, and we've talked about it at length. I think there's truth to both sides of this. The people that were arrested were people from within the state. The agitators came from out of state. Many of them.
You believe that?
Oh, I know that.
You do?
I do.
Okay.
I saw it with my own eyes. I saw the vehicles with out-of-state plates. The intelligence I got was spot on from another law enforcement agency. So I think there were some people coming into the state on all these events that were agitators, coming in, mixing it up, and then getting out of the state. And I think, social media played a big role in this, and a lot of the people that showed up that night were Rhode Islanders that were watching social media and showed up for the event. Just prior to the police car burning that night, I was at the State House coming in from Francis Street, and I could see several of these vehicles getting onto the highway. They made contact with me and others, and and took off out of state. So I think some people came, mixed it up, did what they wanted to do, and then left very soon thereafter.
And either way, they did do what you said was you were getting from another agency, which was getting.
Well, I will say this: the intelligence I got that night was spot on. I was told it would happen at 11 o'clock, and it occurred right at 11 o'clock. So I know the intelligence I got was correct.
So it does beg the question then, was there a law enforcement failure if the intelligence was so strong, turned out to be so true, yet it happened anyway?
No, I disagree. It was a law enforcement success.
How so?
Because we mitigated what could have been much more damage down there. So there were 60 state troopers there, approximately, waiting in Providence somewhere. There were numerous Providence police officers waiting in Providence. We made notice to them of what could happen long before it occurred. And also, by the way, at 5 o'clock, a message was intercepted by the Fusion Center of a picture predicting what would happen that night. So we had the picture, we had intelligence, true and accurate intelligence that was coming in at 9 o'clock, and also the time it would occur. All three things lined up. So you can't look the other way at that. So we had a large law enforcement presence that night, and I truly feel that the men and women of the State Police and the Providence Police prevented large-scale destruction in the city that night.
I always find police brass tend to be the biggest Monday morning quarterbacks I've ever met, and they always do something called an after-action report when there's a big incident. I know this agency does the same thing.
We do.
Okay. Was there any lessons that you learned, particularly from June 1st, that you would apply moving forward? Or do you feel very comfortable with every decision that was made leading up to that?
We did do an after-action report, and I do feel, and not all of them turned out well. This one turned out well. I do feel we did everything we needed to do to really minimize the impact of those several hundred people that showed up that night. I think it was a success story for the Providence Police and the State Police that night.
You touched on personnel a little bit. I think your sworn personnel is around 250? Approximately, something like that. In that interview, I asked, what is the magic number for you? And you, to your credit, you didn't want to give it because you weren't sure what the needs of the agency were going to be. Your predecessor had put the number at 300. You're about 50 short of that right now. Did you get the staffing, both in number and in makeup, to where you wanted it when you took the job? Are you happy where the agency is in terms
Well, we
of
have a
personnel?
class in right now that has about 34 recruits left in it. So I do believe the accurate number should be about 325.
Wow, that's a big number.
That's a big number. That is, well, it's not a big number when you look at surrounding states. We're the smallest state police agency in the country.
Fair, but I mean relative to the agency and the history of this agency.
Right, but when you're looking at those numbers, you can't just look at patrol. Patrol, we're in good shape. We have the complement of troopers that we need to have on the road. So I'm comfortable with that. The detective function of the State Police, we have about 80 personnel assigned to detectives. We've taken on a much larger role in what we investigate. The Special Victims Unit is one big area that was expanded. So that just deals with sexual assaults, domestic assaults.
So you need more detectives.
So we definitely need more detectives, both in computer crimes, financial crimes, Special Victims Unit, and others. That would be an area that definitely, cyber's everything now. We need a much more robust cyber unit. So yes, we need expansion in the Detective Bureau.
Are you on track to get to 325? It seems like it'll still be.
Not with one class.
Yeah.
Our elected officials have been very supportive of us, getting the personnel we need. So we're on track to put 35 troopers on, or 34, within hopefully the next few months when they graduate. And then after that, we are scheduled to start recruitment for another class. So we should be able to bring it up to 300 at least within the next 18 months or so.
Sort of pivoting, but I wonder if the legalization of recreational marijuana could play a role in this at all. You and I have talked in the past about the need for drug recognition experts, DREs, and there's competing bills. I believe the governor's bill has money allocated to law enforcement. I believe the Senate bill does not. at this. We'll see how it comes out in the end. But I imagine you support a bill that would send some of the money that the state gets from recreational marijuana to law enforcement. How would that be used?
So to be clear, I'm not advocating or supporting that marijuana should be legalized.
Didn't you testify in support of it under
Well,
Raimondo?
that's what was reported by the media.
Okay.
But I supported the bill because it provided the resources needed if and when that became legal.
But that's still testifying in support of
Well,
the bill.
I'll tell you, but Tim, I could have stuck my head in the sand and just say no. It's already here. We're the smallest state sandwiched between other states that have it legalized. It's already in this state. We already have to deal with it.
Yeah, people are driving through.
Exactly. And they're going right over the state line to buy it.
Yeah.
So, once again, I could just say, make believe it doesn't exist, but it does exist. Anecdotally, I talk to my troopers all the time. They estimate out of 10 motor vehicle stops, 6 to 7 are impaired somehow with medicinal, illegal, or legal marijuana.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. So out of 10 stops, 60 to 70% have something that they feel is in their system, not to the point where they're totally impaired. That's a different story. But just it's in the system somewhere. And so the reason I supported that bill, because it provided great resources to law enforcement for additional personnel and DRE. I didn't dream that up. I looked at the bigger states, Massachusetts, which legalized marijuana around that time. And I went to the colonel of the Mass State Police. I said, tell me what was done right, what was done wrong when legalization happened here in the state. And the comments I got from the superintendent was, we did not get the resources we needed to manage this. I don't know if they didn't think it was going to pass or what. So they really had to do a lot of backing up to figure out how they were going to handle the additional drain on public safety. So 3 years ago, I knew that if it went through, we needed to have those resources.
Well, here we are again, and they're debating this very fact. So back to my original question, if the resources came in, and it's a moving target what those resources could be, how would they be used?
Well, first of all, we're going to need more personnel to, there will be an increase in people driving while impaired with marijuana. There's no doubt. And we need, and this is just not state police, the municipalities need these resources as well. We need sworn personnel that are trained in drug recognition, which is a very labor-intensive process to train someone like that.
Because let's be clear, there's no chemical test
That's
like
right.
alcohol that you can conduct with someone who's
That's right.
impaired with marijuana.
That's right. A DUI, driving while intoxicated with liquor, is fairly easy to prove because there is a chemical test. And you can smell it. There's a lot of different things, But when it comes to marijuana, it's in your system. And I know the industry is working hard to get some type of chemical test, saliva test, blood test, something that could give us instantaneous knowledge of how impaired that person is. But this is all wide open. We don't have anything yet. So a drug recognition expert, it's a very labor-intensive school, a lot of training, a lot of recertification, and these are the things we're going to need. That's where the bulk of the resources would go.
You make, hundreds of decisions a day as the head of this agency. Are there any that stand out to you in which you regret or you feel you got wrong?
Well, I've asked myself that question many times. I don't feel I got any wrong. I really don't regret making those decisions, but there's some very tough decisions you have to make. Personnel decisions. Those are the toughest to me. I'm dealing with an agency that is fairly small comparable to other large agencies on state police agencies. Like Mass State Police has their full complements, about 2,500
Yeah,
troopers.
2,500, yeah, it's up there.
So I have a personal knowledge of all my troopers and everything they do, know their marital status and their children's names, and same with me. They know everything about me. So whenever there's a personnel decision of either someone did something wrong or you have to make promotions and you've got 10 people that put in, you only have one. Those are the toughest decisions I have to make, because I have to take all my personal, I'm going to say bias, knowledge of what I know and just do it in the fairest way I possibly can. That's why I came up with and revised a promotion process. We have a promotion process now, which to me is one of my best successes. It takes it out of my hands to a point where I just could pick anyone that I felt needed to be promoted. Now is a process, an interview process. We look at of what they've done in their careers. We look at their education, military service, and so
So more
forth.
of a rubric
Exactly.
where you can apply metrics to it.
And they're assigned a number, and the number goes to the thousands. So say the number's 4.325, and the other person's 4.01. Well, the person with the higher number in this matrix that we looked at would be above the other person, and that is how we tend to promote people now.
You brought up personnel decisions, and I'm sure you knew this question was coming. I have to ask you about Lieutenant John Gadro. I'm sure a tough, maybe not a tough one for you to decide on, but there have been some people that have wondered why he wasn't straight up terminated by you, and that maybe you treated him with, very leniently after he was caught by a municipal police officer allegedly having sex in a police cruiser on duty. He eventually, I should say, retired, and that means he'll get his full benefits. And there are some people who go, well, wait a minute, why didn't Colonel Manni fire Lieutenant Gadro when that happened? What do you say to that?
So first I will say this, that was a tough personnel decision anytime you're recommending termination for anybody on this job. But what I will tell you is he was treated just like everyone else was treated or would be treated, exactly. And let me go over the time frame. I found out about this October 15th around noontime. That's when I first learned of some type of inappropriate behavior by a member of the state police. The allegation was that it occurred the previous February. So I found out in October. An internal affairs detective was down in Charlestown within an hour of me finding out. And an internal affairs number was pulled. There's a process that every police officer in the state, the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, that a police chief or colonel has to follow. And it protects, there's a great protection for police officers under that Bill of Rights. So you investigate it, get a statement, and you make a determination of what the punishment would be. Once it was investigated, my recommendation was termination.
You wanted to fire him.
Yes.
Why didn't it happen?
Well, under the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, there's a time frame. It usually takes 30 to 90 days for that to come to fruition. Well, first off, just because you recommend it doesn't mean you're going to get it. You have to go before a Bill of Rights panel. And for those of you that are not familiar with it, management gets to pick a person to sit on that panel. The person being accused gets to pick a person on that panel. And then they either can agree on a neutral party, or you go to the presiding judge to get a neutral party. And there's two lists, the police chief's list and the union's list across the state. So depending on who is picked as the neutral usually determines how that will turn out. So you would need at least the majority, a two-person vote, to go through with whatever discipline you're recommending. So now to get back to your question. A person who's accused of something still has to be proved. They're allowed this protection, and they can retire in that time frame before it's proven. So they can elect to just walk out the door, unless it's criminal in nature. If it's criminal in nature, then that's...
And he was not criminally
charged. He was not, no.
We should point out.
So, and there have been many others like this. This wasn't the only one, that they chose to retire prior to going to a panel to determine if there's any validity to what the accusation was.
And that's what happened in this case?
That's exactly what happened in this case.
Okay. All this being said, you wanted to terminate Leobor. There's been a lot of talk about reforming Leobor. You have dealt with it firsthand, both when you were trooper, and now, not that you were ever disciplined, but you're aware of the law. And as the head of the agency, does it need to be reformed?
So I sat on that commission.
Yeah.
I think it was about a year ago. Colonel Clements from the Province Police was chosen to represent the Rhode Island Police Chiefs Association, and I sat on the board as well as a representation for the governor. And I do think it definitely needs some type of reform. The hands are tied by the police chiefs and colonels as to, for example, anything more than a 2-day suspension triggers a Leobor hearing. These hearings are so expensive. I mean, if you have a hearing for every single time someone's accused or wants to fight it, you're talking $25,000 to $50,000 in legal fees. North Province just had an incident where they ran up over $100,000, I believe,
Yeah, saw that.
in legal fees. So I think that, of course, police officers need protection. They do. But there should be some tweaking of this Leobor. The police chief should be able to explain to the public what the accusation is. There should be more leeway than just a 2-day suspension, whatever that number is, 5 or 10 days, whatever it is. And also, the panel, the composition of the panel I know is troubling a lot of people. That's 3 police officers. So one of the recommendations that came out by the people that sat on that board, in that commission, was that there's a true, impartial, neutral person, similar to like the Board of Elections, whether it's a retired judge, whoever it is, someone that calls balls and strikes, so that you don't have these 2 lists going of a police chief's pick or a union pick, because you could almost guess how that board is going to vote by whoever's sitting as the neutral. Sure. That's really what it comes down to. I know the question came up, was 3 people enough on that board? Well, if you think about this, if you have 5 people, 7 people, 9 people, any odd number, it doesn't matter what that number is if the neutral party is still the one person that's going to decide this.
Effectively, it's an even number.
That's right.
Board.
It's going to be. It's going to be.
And then the deciding neutral.
That's
party.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So it needs to be someone who is totally impartial, and the comment came up, and it's someone who's appointed. So it could be, say, a judge, a retired judge, someone that is totally impartial and just calls it as they see it.
Let's look ahead. A lot of talk on who might replace you. Who's your recommendation?
I've had numerous meetings with the governor on a transition plan, and I've had a transition plan from day one, which every leader should have, is who's going to take their place in the event someone drops dead, someone retires, leaves, forced out, whatever. You need a transition plan. And I've had numerous conversations with the governor about it, and those are private conversations, and I really can't say any more than that.
All right, then to whoever it is, whoever is the next colonel or superintendent, what is your advice to them?
Well, my advice to them is this: be fair and equitable with everyone. There's one right answer. I have this moral compass that sits on my desk, and it's in my pocket. My wife thinks it's corny, but I brought it to show you. So it sits on my desk, and sometimes when you're going to make these real tough decisions, you look down at it, and you know the needle never moves. It's always facing north. So no matter how you turn it, it's facing the right way. And my wife laughs about it because she gave me the compass, and not knowing what I do with it. But that is my advice to anyone. The right decision has to be made. Take all the other variables out of it, and there's really only one right answer to any question you have.
Follow the truth.
That's right. Follow the truth, fair and equitably. And sure, there's going to be people that don't agree with you, and sure, there's going to be people that are disappointed. But you can sleep at night knowing you made the right decision. It's fair and equitable.